was young, he was strong, he was very, very angry. He stood outside the eastern gate of the city, glaring at the guards, Romans. He hated every Roman who had ever set foot in God's land of Judah. And he hated every Roman who would ever set foot in God's land. And why? Why could this pollution not be ended? Why had the master not done it when it would have been so easy just a day or so ago? Because as they walked through that gate behind the master, everyone came crowding with their palms, with their cries of Hosanna. Everybody loved the master that day. All the master would have had to do was to say a word, make a gesture. And those crowds, all those people, the woman who prayed so deeply, the cook who was brave enough to cook everything, the young soldier, they would have risen and driven the Romans from the land, but it didn't happen. It wasn't too late, though. He had a plan. It could still happen. The Romans could still be driven away. And so he followed a flock of Passover lambs into the city towards the temple. Judas had taken the first step. A couple of days later, Peter and John were on their way through that same gate, and Peter was about as happy as anybody could be. First of all, and he would never have said this out loud, he was really glad that Judas was not part of this necessary errand, because Judas, yes, he was in charge of the money, but he was grumpy. He'd been in a terrible mood recently, and Peter was just happier without him. And besides, John said he was a thief, and Peter thought that might be the case. He didn't know. He didn't care, because he could watch the crowds, the brave soldier, the story keeper, everybody gathered from everywhere. By the hundreds, by the thousands, by the hundreds of thousands had come for Passover. Peter was there too. He was going to have Passover with the master, and it was going to be the best Passover ever. He just knew it. Sure enough, the room that they had been led to was utterly gorgeous, the prettiest place that Peter had ever seen. The ritual was marvelous. The food was marvelous. Now, of course, the master said things that Peter had a little trouble understanding. He was talking about broken bread and wine and body and all, but Peter was used to not quite understanding, and he knew that if he just sat with it for a while, he'd be all right. But then the master said something that even Peter could understand. He said, "One of you here will betray me." Peter shouted, "Not I. I would follow you. I would follow you to jail and death." And the master said, "No, Peter, you will betray me before the cock crows 3 times. And Peter was so distressed that he did not notice the glance that passed between Jesus and Judas. He did not notice when Judas slipped out of the room. And Judas went down the stairs, stood in the street, in the upper city, among all those Romanized houses, and he said to the blank wall and the door he just emerged from, "It's not betrayal, Master. It's necessity. For there must be an uprising. There must be an uprising to remove all the Romans from this land, to purify this land itself. The temple must fall. You yourself said it would." And he turned and he walked away. Now, in another of the houses in the upper city, Caiaphas, the high priest, and his father-in-law were waiting for their visitor in the small office reserved for greeting those people who were not friends or family. And Ananias, the father-in-law, said to Caiaphas, "What if this Jesus fellow actually is the Messiah? He has the authority." Caiaphas answered, "The Yahweh who made us heirs of Zadok the priest would never send a Messiah right now. The time is completely wrong. And it doesn't matter. Even if this Jesus is the Messiah, I know what I must do, and so do you." We both know that the emperor has come out of his long period of seclusion. He has put away, killed even, the evil regent. He has sent letters to all the governors, reminding them to treat the people of the empire with tolerance and respect as far as they are able. Now I ask you, if we turn Jesus and his followers loose, there will be an insurrection. And what will happen to the tolerance and respect that we can expect? And as he spoke, he arranged the last of the silver coins on the table. Pontius Pilate, in Herod's palace, had during his years in Judea built up quite a good spy system. And so it was a street urchin who ran to tell him that Judas had gone to the house of the high priests. And somebody else came to inform him that the high priests, Judas and the servants, had gone to the garden. And he heard everything that had happened. He heard about everything. He heard it all. And he knew. The only thing he did not know was what he was going to do. Because he was in a very tight place. It was, again, the question of the emperor and the regent. It was the regent who had appointed Judas, appointed Pilate to his position in Judea. And now the regent was gone. What did the emperor think of Pilate? What could Pilate do? If he released this Jesus, he would be showing tolerance and understanding. But what would happen then? Would there be a riot? What would a riot do to him? And so he washed his hands and decided to do whatever the crowd told him to do. And so after he had questioned this Jesus fellow, done a little torture just to make sure the questioning stuck, he turned to the crowd. He turned to the woman who prayed so deeply. He turned to the brave soldier, to the man who cooked. And he asked them, he asked everybody in the crowd, he asked you, what am I to do with this Jesus fellow? And the answer was, crucify him. And he asked again. And the storekeeper and all the people said, crucify him. And you said, crucify him. And so it was.